Everyone agrees. Escas is natural. It's in every culture, every era, every generation. Desire isn't taught, it's felt. Science, psychology, anthropology. They all confirm that human sexuality is a basic biological drive, not a moral defect. Even children, before they understand shame, express curiosity about their own bodies. Most people believe religion simply tried to regulate sexuality, to prevent harm, preserve family, promote values, that it taught discipline, not degradation. But when you actually trace the history, a different pattern emerges. Something strange happens. You find guilt where no harm exists. You find rules with no victims. You find rituals built around self-policing desire, even thoughts. And when you follow that pattern across centuries and cultures, one disturbing truth becomes clear. Sexual shame wasn't a spiritual accident. It was a strategy. In this video, you'll discover how religion didn't just condemn behavior. It colonized the human mind, turning biology into sin and forgiveness into currency. If you've ever questioned why desire feels like a moral failure, hit like, drop your thoughts below, and subscribe. What comes next will reframe everything. Before religion turned sex into sin, it turned it into property. In the earliest agricultural societies, something changed. For the first time in human history, people could accumulate land, wealth, resources. And with that came a new obsession: inheritance. Who gets what after you die? Who controls the land? Who carries on the family name? The answer depended on one thing: who your children were. And the only way to be sure they were yours was to control the women who gave birth to them. That's where the earliest religious rules around sexuality began. Not with virtue, not with morality, but with ownership. Female sexuality became a matter of state, of lineage, of law. Virginity wasn't about spiritual purity. It was about economic certainty. If a woman was a virgin at marriage, her husband could be sure that any child she bore would carry his bloodline. Over time, these practical controls were draped in spiritual language. What started as a way to control inheritance became a doctrine to control souls. Religious leaders didn't say, "Keep women loyal so we know who owns the land." They said, "Keep women pure because God demands it." The language shifted, but the motive stayed the same. Purity was never about peace. It was about power. And once this idea took hold, that sexuality had to be governed. It was no longer just about women. Rules emerged around when, how, and with whom anyone could engage in sex. Marriage became not just a bond, but a spiritual contract with strict terms. Sex, outside it, not just risky, but sinful. Sex, for pleasure, suspicious. Even the thought of desire, a moral failure. But underneath the sermons, the rituals, the fear, the same old logic remained. Control the body, and you control the person. But once these rules were in place, religion found something even more valuable than order. It found obedience. Religious guilt is unique because it doesn't require you to do anything wrong. You don't have to hurt anyone. You don't have to break a law. You don't even have to act. In many faiths, you only have to think. A passing thought, a feeling, a dream. And suddenly, you're guilty. Not for what you chose to do, but for what your body did on its own. This is how religion rewrote the rules of morality. It moves sin from the external world into the internal one. Not just actions, but urges. Not just choices, but instincts. You could be sitting alone in a room, having harmed no one, and still feel unclean. This was no accident. It was architecture. Because when guilt comes from within, you don't need guards. You don't need judges. You don't even need walls. The prison builds itself inside your mind. Religious teachings turned natural biology into moral weakness. Arousal, suspicious. Pleasure, dangerous. Fantasies, sinful. For women, even menstruation was framed as impurity, a monthly reminder that their bodies were, by default, unworthy. For men, even a nocturnal emission was labeled as defilement. These weren't crimes. They weren't choices. They were simply human. And yet, they became evidence of spiritual failure. This is where religious guilt takes root, not in the things we control, but in the things we can't. Desire isn't a sin, but religion made it feel like one. So people learned to hide, to repress, to punish themselves for being alive. Even today, many carry this weight long after they've left the faith. They no longer believe in hell, but they still feel ashamed of what they want, of who they are. That's the power of guilt without crime. It doesn't need proof. It just needs a whisper. But guilt alone doesn't hold power unless someone offers to remove it. And that's where the cycle becomes profitable. Once guilt is planted, the next step is simple. Sell the cure. This is where morality becomes economy, where sin becomes a subscription model. Throughout history, religion didn't just condemn desire, it monetized it. In the Catholic Church, confession wasn't just spiritual, it became transactional. You sinned? Confess. Do penance. Pay your offering. In some cases, you could even buy indulgences, official documents that claim to reduce your time in purgatory. Salvation, sold by the scroll. Fast forward to today, and the model is still alive, just dressed differently. Purity rings, abstinence retreats, virginity pledge programs, modesty, merchandise. Shame has become a market. The same institutions that preach guilt also sell the tools to manage it. Courses, books, seminars, private counseling, and the loop is always the same. Step 1, define the sign. Step 2, make it impossible to avoid. Step 3, offer forgiveness for a price. This isn't spiritual care, it's emotional dependency. Because if you're told that even your thoughts are impure, even your dreams are sinful, then you're never fully clean. And that's the genius of the system. It creates a need that only the institution claims to fill. You can't stop being human, so you can't stop feeling guilty, which means you'll never stop needing them. They own both sides of the equation. They manufacture the wound and sell you the bandage. It's not a bug in the system, it is the system. And while the rituals vary, the message is always the same. You are broken. We can fix you, but not for free. Some give money, others give obedience, time, silence, loyalty, and many give all of it, for years, sometimes for life. Because when the guilt runs deep enough, you'll pay whatever it takes to feel whole again. But it gets darker, because this control wasn't evenly applied. It was designed to serve some while punishing others. Not all guilt is distributed equally. Some are born into it. For centuries, religion painted women's bodies in extremes, either sacred vessels or sinful traps. There was no middle ground. A woman who waited, who obeyed, who stayed pure, was holy. A woman who desired, who questioned, who acted on her instincts, was dangerous. And so purity became a currency, one that women were expected to guard, but that men were often allowed to ignore. Male desire, excusable, expected, even celebrated. Female desire, condemned, feared, punished. This was never about equal virtue. It was about control. Because if you control a woman's sexuality, You control marriage. You control reproduction. You control inheritance. You control the very structure of society. Purity culture took this ancient system and gave it modern slogans. Don't be a lollipop everyone's licked. Don't be a rose with missing petals. Don't be a piece of gum someone else has already chewed. These weren't metaphors. They were weapons, designed to make girls associate their worth with their virginity. One choice, one moment, and you're no longer whole. Even in marriage, the control doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Desire is only allowed under strict rules, with conditions, with limitations. And if you break them, the judgment is swift, but not equally shared. Men are forgiven. Women are forever stained. This double standard isn't an oversight. It's the blueprint. Because the system wasn't built to protect people from sin. It was built to protect power. And it worked, not just because it punished, but because it taught women to punish themselves, to feel ashamed of their own bodies, to fear their own feelings, to silence their own questions. But perhaps the cruelest effect of all is how deeply this shame sticks. Even when the faith is gone, the guilt remains. Some people leave the religion, but the religion doesn't leave them. They stop believing in hell, but still feel guilty for wanting to be touched. They know there's no sin in intimacy, but still flinch at the thought of pleasure. This is what makes sexual guilt so uniquely destructive. It outlives belief. It outlives doctrine. Sometimes it outlives even the memory of where it came from. Because when you're raised to fear your own body, to see desire as defilement, to link arousal with shame, those ideas embed themselves, not as theology, but as instinct. A moment of attraction is followed by self-loathing. An intimate encounter is followed by silence, or tears, or unexplained panic. People struggle to set boundaries, or to ask for what they need. They fear judgment, even in loving relationships, because judgment was the first thing they learned about love. And even years later, with the scriptures closed and the faith long gone, they still hear that voice. You are dirty. You are broken. You are unworthy. It shows up in therapy, in trust issues, in the inability to say, I want this, without shame. And for many, the hardest part is not knowing why. Because the teachings were absorbed before they were old enough to question them, before they knew what desire even was. They were taught to fear it. This isn't just emotional residue. It's trauma. And it's not rare. It's common. It's everywhere. Silent. Internal. Invisible. And when guilt becomes this personal, this invisible, it becomes the perfect cover for real abuse. When guilt becomes the norm, truth becomes dangerous. Because if you feel ashamed of your own body, your own thoughts, your own desire, how likely are you to speak up when someone crosses a line? Religious guilt doesn't just control behavior, it silences victims. Because when you're taught that purity is everything, you'll do anything to avoid being seen as impure. Even if you were abused, even if you said no, even if it wasn't your fault, you stay silent. Because breaking that silence feels like confessing a sin. And the predators know that. They count on it. From churches to mosques, temples to schools. Stories keep surfacing. Stories of priests, of pastors, of imams, of gurus. Men in positions of spiritual power using that power to exploit, to touch, to coerce. And when they're caught, too often, nothing happens. because the institution's image matters more than the victim's reality. They cover it up. They move the abuser. They blame the child. They say, "Don't ruin his reputation. Don't question God's servant. Don't divide the community." Meanwhile, those same institutions punish members for consensual relationships. A teenager holding hands, a woman in a tank top, a couple who didn't wait, condemned, shamed, ostracized, consensual acts punished, predators protected. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the design. Because guilt doesn't just stop people from sinning. It stops them from speaking. And when shame is this powerful, abuse hides in its shadow. And perhaps the most chilling part is this. It was never just about sex. It was about obedience in all areas of life. Sexual guilt doesn't stay in the bedroom. It spreads. Once you teach someone that their desires are dangerous, you can teach them anything. You can train them to question their instincts, to surrender their judgment, to fear their own body. And once they doubt themselves, they start looking outside themselves for answers, for permission, for rules, for someone to tell them what's okay and what's not. This isn't just spiritual. It becomes political. Because people who feel unworthy don't rebel. They obey. People who feel broken don't resist. They submit. Religious sexual guilt becomes a gateway to broader obedience. Obedience to leaders, to laws, to ideologies they were never allowed to question. Think about it. If you accept that your own thoughts can be sinful, you're more likely to believe that your opinions, your politics, your voice can be sinful too. And that's how censorship starts. That's how purity laws are passed, how education is restricted, how entire populations become easier to manage, not through violence, but through shame. Because shame is cheaper than chains and far more effective. You don't need to silence someone who's already afraid to speak. You don't need to imprison someone who's already policing themselves. Sexual guilt was never just about sex. It was about training people to obey. Obey first in private, then in public, then in every part of life. It creates a person who not only follows the rules, but believes they deserve punishment for ever questioning them. And that's the final prison, the one built inside the self, where morality isn't measured by how you treat others, but by how well you suppress your own humanity. But if morality demands the rejection of your own nature, the denial of your own body, the erasure of your own thoughts, is it really moral? Or is it just obedience in disguise? If this reshaped how you view morality, shame, and control, share this video. Someone else is still trapped in guilt they never deserved.